英日対訳、名作で英語を学べるシリーズナンバー2。D 坂の殺人事件。江戸川乱歩。この音声は、Cefr B1 相当、Toeic リスニング&リーディングテスト500から600点程度の学習者向けです。本書を開きながらお聞きください。まずはリスニング、次にシャドーイング、最後に音読に挑戦してみましょう。単語リスト、覚えておきたいフレーズ、TOEIC 登録商標マーク形式の練習問題は書籍に収録しています。YouTube 概要欄から書籍をご覧いただけます。それでは物語の世界を楽しみながら英語を学んでいきましょう。
The murder on D Slope. It was a hot and humid night in early September. I was drinking iced coffee at my favorite cafe called Hakka Bacon. It was located in the middle of the main street on D Slope. At that time, I had just graduated from school. I did not have a regular job yet. I spent my days relaxing at my boarding house and reading books. When I got tired of that, I would go for an aimless walk. Visiting cheap cafes was my daily routine. Hakka Bacon was close to my boarding house. It was located on the way to anywhere I walked. Therefore, I visited this cafe the most. However, I had a bad habit. I always stayed too long when I entered a cafe. I did not have a big appetite. Also, I did not have much money in my pocket. So, I never ordered a plate of food. Instead, I ordered 2 or 3 cups of cheap coffee. I would sit there for an hour or 2. This did not mean I had special feelings for the waitresses. I did not want to tease them, either. It was just brighter and more comfortable than my boarding house. That night, I was drinking a cup of iced coffee very slowly as usual. I sat at my favorite table facing the street. I was staring out the window without thinking. By the way, D Slope used to be famous for chrysanthemum doll shows. The narrow street had recently been widened due to city planning. It had just become a large main street. There were still some empty lots on both sides of the road. It was much quieter than it is now. Right across the wide street from Hakka Bacon, there was a second-hand bookstore. Actually, I had been looking at the front of that store for a while. It was a shabby, old bookstore on the edge of town. It was not a particularly nice view. However, I had a special interest in it. Recently, I had met a strange man at this cafe. His name was Akechi Kagoro. When I talked to him, he seemed very odd but smart. What I liked most was that he loved detective novels. He told me before that his childhood female friend was now the wife of this bookstore owner. I remembered buying books there a few times. The bookstore owner's wife was quite beautiful. I couldn't explain exactly why, but she had a sensual charm that attracted men. She always watched the store at night. I was sure she would be there tonight, too. I looked inside the small store, but no one was there. I kept watching, thinking she would come out soon. However, the wife did not come out. I got tired of waiting. I was about to look at the watch shop next door. Suddenly, I saw the sliding door between the store and the back room close tightly. Experts call this kind of door a musu door. Usually, the center part has a double layer of fine vertical wood instead of paper. It can be opened and closed. I thought it was very strange. Second-hand bookstores are easily robbed by shoplifters. Even if no one is in the store, someone usually watches from the back room through the gap in the door. It was weird to close that peeking spot. It might make sense in winter. But it was a hot and humid night in early September. First of all, it was strange that the door was completely closed. Thinking about these things, it seemed like something was happening in the back room. I could not look away. Speaking of the bookstore owner's wife, I once heard the waitresses at this cafe talking about a strange rumor. It seemed to be gossip from the public bath. The bookstore's wife is so beautiful, but when she takes her clothes off, she is covered in bruises. They must be marks from being hit or pinched. It's strange because she and her husband seem to get along well, one said. Then another waitress replied, The wife of Asahiya, the noodle restaurant next door, often has bruises too. They must be from being hit as well. I did not think deeply about what this rumor meant. I just thought her husband was cruel. But readers, that was not the case at all. It was a small detail, but I later learned it was deeply connected to this whole story. Anyway, I kept looking at the same spot for about 30 minutes. I had a bad feeling. I felt like something would happen if I looked away. So, I couldn't take my eyes off the store. At that moment, Akechi Kagoro, whom I mentioned earlier, passed by the window. He was wearing his usual thick striped cotton kimono. He walked with a strange swing in his shoulders. He noticed me, bowed, and came inside. He ordered an iced coffee. Then he sat next to me and faced the window, just like I did. When he noticed I was staring at one spot, he followed my gaze. He also looked at the second-hand bookstore across the street. Strangely, he also seemed very interested. He began to stare at it without looking away. As if we had planned it, we both watched the same place and chatted about random things. I have already forgotten what we talked about then. It is not very related to this story, so I will skip it. However, I am sure we talked about crimes and detectives. To give you one example. Is a perfect crime impossible? I think it is quite possible, Akechi said. For example, look at Tanizaki Junichiro's story, On the Way. A crime like that would almost never be discovered. Of course, a detective solves it in the novel. But that is just the author's great imagination. No, I don't think so, I replied. In reality, it might be different. But in theory, no crime is impossible to solve. The only problem is that the current police do not have a great detective like the one in that story. Our conversation went something like that. But suddenly, we both became silent at the same time. An interesting event was happening at the bookstore across the street. We had not taken our eyes off it while talking. It seems you noticed it too, I whispered, and he answered immediately. It must be a book thief. It is very strange. I have been watching since I came in. That makes 4 people now. You haven't even been here for 30 minutes. For people in 30 minutes is a bit strange. I was watching before you came. About an hour ago, I saw the lattice part of that sliding door close. I have been paying attention ever since. Maybe the people in the house went out. But that sliding door never opened once. If they went out, they must have used the back door. But it is definitely strange that no one has been there for 30 minutes. What do you say? Let's go and check. You are right. Even if nothing is wrong inside the house, something might have happened outside. I left the cafe hoping it would be an interesting criminal case. Akechi must have felt the same way. He was also quite excited. The bookstore had a common layout. The whole shop had a dirt floor. There were tall bookshelves reaching the ceiling on the front, left, and right sides. The lower part of the shelves acted as a table to display books. In the middle of the floor, there was a rectangular table, like an island. This was also used for displaying and stacking books. On the right side of the front bookshelf, there was a space about 3 feet wide. This was the passage to the back room. The sliding door I mentioned earlier stood there. Usually the owner or his wife sat quietly on a small tatami mat in front of this door to watch the store. Akechi and I went up to the tatami mat and called out loudly, but there was no answer. It seemed that no one was really there. I opened the sliding door a little and looked into the back room. The lights were off, and it was completely dark. However, it looked like a human figure was lying in the corner of the room. Feeling suspicious, I called out again, but there was no reply. Never mind. Let's go inside. So, the two of us stepped loudly into the back room. Akechi turned on the light switch. At that moment, we both cried out in surprise. In the corner of the brightened room, a woman's dead body was lying on the floor. "Is the wife of this store," I finally said. "Doesn't it look like she was strangled?" Akechi stepped closer to examine the body. "There is no chance of saving her. We must tell the police quickly. I will go to the public telephone. Please stay here and keep watch. We shouldn't tell the neighbors yet. We don't want them to destroy any clues." He said this like an order and ran to the public telephone about half a block away. I usually argued a lot about crimes and detectives like an expert, but this was the first time I actually faced a real case. I did not know what to do. I could only stare closely at the room. The room was just a small six-mat space. At the back, on the right side, there was a narrow wooden porch. Beyond that was a small garden and a toilet. Across the garden was a wooden fence. Because it was summer, everything was left open, so I could see straight through. On the left side, there was a hinged door. Behind it was a small wooden floor area connected to the back door. I could see a narrow sink there, and the window with a sliding screen was closed. On the right side of the room, for sliding paper doors were closed. It seemed to hide the stairs to the second floor and a storage closet. It was a very common layout for a cheap row house. The dead body was lying near the left wall. Her head was pointing toward the store space. I tried not to disturb the crime scene. Also, I was a bit scared. So, I kept my distance from a body. However, the room was small. Even if I tried not to look, my eyes naturally went there. The woman was wearing a cotton kimono with a rough, medium-sized pattern. She was lying almost flat on her back. Her kimono was rolled up above her knees, showing her thighs. But there were no signs that she had fought back. I could not see clearly, but her neck had a purple mark. It looked like she had been strangled. There was constant traffic on the main street outside. People were talking loudly and dragging their wooden sandals. Drunk people were shouting popular songs. The world seemed completely peaceful. Yet inside this house, separated by just one paper door, a woman lay brutally murdered. What irony! I felt strangely emotional and just stood there in shock. "They will be here soon." Akechi came back out of breath. "Oh, I see." I felt too tired to even speak. We looked at each other in silence for a long time. Soon, a police officer in uniform arrived with a man in a suit. I later learned that the uniformed officer was the chief detective of the K police station. From his face and the things he carried, I could tell the other man was a police doctor from the same station. We briefly explained the whole situation to the chief detective. Then I added this. When my friend Akechi came into the cafe, I happened to look at the clock. It was exactly around 8:30. Therefore, the sliding doors lattice probably closed around 8 o'clock. At that time, I am sure the light was on inside. So, it is clear that someone was alive in this room at least around 8 o'clock. While the chief detective listened to our statements and took notes, the police doctor finished examining the body. He waited for us to stop talking, then spoke. "It is strangulation. She was killed by hands. Look at this. These purple marks are fingerprints. Also, the bleeding spots are where the nails hit. The thumb mark is on the right side of her neck. This means it was done with the right hand. Let's see. It probably hasn't been more than an hour since she died. But of course, there is no chance to save her now." "So she was pinned down from above," the chief detective said thoughtfully. "But if so, there are no signs of a struggle. The killer probably did very quickly, with terrible force." Then he turned to us and asked where the owner of this house was. But, of course, we had no idea. So, Akechi kindly went to call the owner of the watch shop next door. The conversation between the chief detective and the watchmaker went somewhat like this. "Where did the owner go?" The owner here goes to run a night stall for second-hand books every night. He never comes back until around midnight. Yes. Where does he set up his night stall? He usually goes to Hirakoji in Ueno. But I really don't know where he went tonight. Yes. Did you hear any noises about an hour ago? What kind of noises? Isn't it obvious? The woman's scream when she was killed or the sounds of a struggle. I did not hear any particular noises like that. Meanwhile, neighbors heard the news and gathered. Passers-by also stopped to look. The front of the bookstore became filled with a large crowd. Among them was the wife from the Tabi sock shop on the other side. She supported the watchmaker's statement. She also stated that she had not heard any sounds either. During this time, the neighbors talked and apparently sent someone to find the bookstore owner. Then, the sound of a car stopping came from the street. Several people walked loudly into the shop. They were court officials who rushed over after an urgent police report. The chief of the K police station arrived at the same time by chance. Detective Kobayashi, who was famous as a great detective at the time, was also with them. Of course, I learned all this later. I have a friend who is a crime reporter. He was very close to Detective Kobayashi, who was in charge of this case. So, I was able to hear many details from him later. The chief detective, who arrived first, explained the situation so far to these people. We also had to repeat our earlier statements again. Let's close the front door. Suddenly, a man shouted loudly and quickly started closing the door. He wore a black alpaca jacket and white trousers. He looked like a low-ranking office worker. This was Detective Kobayashi. He shut out the curious crowd in this way. Then he started his investigation. His method was very bold. He seemed to completely ignore the prosecutor and the police chief. He worked entirely alone from beginning to end. The other people just looked like spectators who came to watch his quick actions. First, he examined the dead body. He checked the neck area very carefully. There are no special features in these finger marks. In other words, there is no clue other than that a normal person pinned her down with a right hand. He said this while looking at the prosecutor. Next, he said he wanted to undress the body to check it. So, like a secret meeting, we onlookers were kicked out into the store area. Therefore, I do not know exactly what they found during that time. But I guess they must have noticed many fresh bruises on the dead woman's body. It was exactly what the waitresses at the cafe had gossiped about. Soon, this secret meeting was over. However, we held back from going into the back room. We just peeked inside from a tatami mat area between the store and the back room. Fortunately, we were the discoverers of the case. Also, they had to take Akechi's fingerprints later. So we were not kicked out until the very end. Or perhaps it is more accurate to say we were detained. However, Detective Kobayashi's work was not limited to the back room. He investigated a wide area inside and outside the house. Since we stayed in one place, we should not have known what he was doing. But luckily, the prosecutor stayed in the back room and hardly moved. Every time the detective came in or out, he reported his findings. We were able to hear all of his reports without missing anything. Based on those reports, the prosecutor made his clerk write down the details for the official record. First, they searched the back room where the body was found. However, there seemed to be no left items, no footprints, and nothing else to catch a detective's eye. Except for one thing. There are fingerprints on the light switch, the detective said. He was sprinkling some white powder on the black hard rubber switch. Considering the situation, the killer must have turned off the light. But which one of you turned it on? Akechi answered that it was him. I see. Please let us take your fingerprints later. Do not touch this light. We will remove it and take it with us as it is. Then the detective went up to the second floor and did not come down for a while. As soon as he came down, he went out, saying he would check the alley. It took about 10 minutes. Soon, he came back with a man holding a lit flashlight in one hand. The man looked about 40 and dirty. He was wearing a dirty crepe shirt and khaki trousers. The footprints are completely useless, the detective reported. Because there is little sunlight, the area around the back door is very muddy. There are too many wooden sandal prints everywhere, so we cannot tell anything. By the way, about this man, he pointed to the man he had brought. He is an ice cream vendor who set up his stall at the corner of the alley behind this house. If the killer escaped from the back door, this man must have seen him. The alley only has one way out. You try answering my questions once again. Then, the conversation between the ice cream vendor and the detective started. Did anyone go in or out of this alley around 8 o'clock tonight? Not a single person. Since it got dark, not even a cat has passed by. The ice cream vendor answered very clearly. I have been setting up my stall here for a long time. Even the housewives of this row house rarely use that alley at night. The ground is very bad and it is completely dark. Did any of your customers go into the alley?
ご視聴いただき、ありがとうございました。物語の前編はここで終了です。続きは中編をお楽しみください。